The human body is supposed to follow the rules. It gets hurt, it heals slowly. It feels pain when it should. It forgets things over time. But every so often, someone comes along whose body, or whose story of survival, breaks every rule doctors thought were fixed. The 10 women on this list have been studied by scientists, covered by major medical journals, and in some cases have changed the direction of medical research entirely. These aren't legends or internet rumors. These are real, documented lives. Let's count them down. Most people forget what they had for lunch 3 Tuesdays ago. Jill Price cannot forget anything. Give her almost any date from her adult life, and she can tell you what day of the week it was, what she was wearing, what was happening in the news, and exactly how she felt. Researchers at the University of California, Irvine, studied her case in the early 2000s and gave her condition a name: highly superior autobiographical memory, or HSAM. Brain imaging later showed physical differences in the regions tied to memory storage, suggesting her brain is wired in a genuinely unusual way rather than simply trained like a memory athlete. What makes her story remarkable isn't just the ability itself, it's the cost of it. Price has described her memory as relentless rather than magical. Painful days replay with the same intensity as the day they happened. Nothing softens with time the way it does for the rest of us. Fewer than 100 people worldwide have ever been confirmed to have HSAM, making Jill Price one of the rarest documented minds on the planet, and one of the first to open the door for scientists studying how memory actually works. In a cave high in the Himalayas, wrapped only in thin robes through brutal winters, one woman spent over a decade proving that the human body might have more control over itself than science assumed. Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo is a Buddhist nun and a practitioner of an ancient meditation technique known as Tummo, sometimes called inner fire meditation. It combines controlled breathing, visualization, and intense focus to deliberately raise body temperature. Researchers, including teams connected to Harvard, have studied Tummo practitioners under laboratory-controlled cold conditions. In some trials, monks trained in the technique were wrapped in cold, wet sheets in freezing temperatures, and were able to raise their skin temperature enough to dry the sheets through body heat alone, a feat that should be physiologically out of reach. Scientists believe the practice activates the sympathetic nervous system in ways typically associated only with extreme physical exertion, not stillness. Tenzin Palmo spent 12 years in isolated retreat in the mountains, and her endurance became one of the clearest human demonstrations that focused mental training can measurably alter basic biological function. Joy Milne, a retired nurse from Scotland, noticed something years before anyone else did. Her husband's scent had changed. It became muskier, different, almost impossible to describe. She didn't think much of it until 12 years later, when he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. When Milne mentioned the smell to a room of Parkinson's researchers at a conference, most people brushed it off. One scientist didn't. Researchers at the University of Manchester decided to test her. They gave her t-shirts worn by both Parkinson's patients and healthy volunteers, without telling her which was which. She correctly identified the Parkinson's shirts almost every time and flagged one healthy participant as positive too. Months later, that person was diagnosed with the disease. Follow-up research published in ACS Central Science found that Parkinson's patients released distinct compounds through their skin oils, chemical signatures Milne's nose could detect long before any visible symptom appeared. Her sense of smell has since helped scientists work toward a non-invasive skin swab test that could catch Parkinson's years earlier than current methods allow. Jo Cameron lived most of her life in Scotland without ever realizing she was different. It wasn't until she sailed through major hip and hand surgeries without needing a single painkiller, recovering faster than doctors thought possible, that anyone thought to investigate. Geneticists at University College London studied her for years and eventually identified the cause, a rare mutation in a gene they had to name themselves because it had never been documented before. They called it FAH-out. Working alongside a more common variant in a related gene, the mutation appears to dial down her body's pain, fear, and anxiety responses almost to zero, while also speeding up wound healing. Cameron is one of only 2 people in the world currently known to carry this specific mutation. The condition isn't purely a gift. Without pain as a warning system, She has unknowingly injured herself before noticing anything was wrong. But researchers at UCL believe her biology could eventually help develop entirely new categories of pain medication, ones that ease suffering without carrying the addiction risks tied to opioids. In 2023, Kelsey Hatcher, a mother from Alabama, went in for a routine prenatal scan and left with news that stunned her medical team. She was pregnant in both of her uteruses at the same time. Hatcher has a condition called uterus didelphys, where a person is born with two fully separate uteruses, each with its own cervix. It's already uncommon, affecting roughly 1 in 3,000 women. A double pregnancy on top of that condition is rare enough that only a small number of cases have ever been documented worldwide. Doctors at the University of Alabama at Birmingham monitored her closely throughout, since each uterus can contract and go into labor independently of the other. That's exactly what happened. Hatcher delivered her 2 babies on different days, each carried to term and delivered safely from a different womb. Her medical team called it one of the rarest pregnancy outcomes they had ever managed, and her case has since become a reference point for how obstetricians think about extremely rare uterine anatomy. Brooklyn Corey was a professional skateboarder and model when, in November 2020, she was attacked by a dog while visiting family in Arizona. The injuries were severe enough that she lost part of her upper lip and nose. In a matter of seconds, the life she'd built around her appearance and athletic career was upended. What set her apart wasn't just the injury, it was what she did next. Rather than disappearing from public life, Corey documented her recovery openly. The surgeries, the setbacks, the exhausting emotional weight of rebuilding a face from almost nothing. Over roughly a year, she underwent multiple reconstructive surgeries aimed at restoring both function and appearance. By sharing the unfiltered reality of that process, she gave people a rare, honest look at what facial reconstruction actually involves, something most survivors go through privately. Her openness turned a personal tragedy into something that resonated with thousands of people navigating their own recoveries. In 2013, Christy Sims' life was violently altered when her ex-boyfriend threw sulfuric acid on her face and body in a premeditated attack. The burns were severe enough to threaten her life, and she spent 2 months in an induced coma while doctors fought to stabilize her. When she woke up, her physical recovery was really just beginning. She would go on to undergo more than a dozen reconstructive surgeries over the following years. What makes her story stand out is what came after the surgeries. Sims became a public speaker and advocate for survivors of domestic violence, sharing her experience at events and with news outlets specifically so others might recognize warning signs before it's too late. She has been open that healing was neither quick nor linear, but her decision to speak publicly turned an act meant to silence and disfigure her into a platform that has reached and warned countless others. Kayla Hayes was 19 years old in October 2017 when she met her ex-boyfriend in South Carolina to talk through their relationship. When she told him it was over, he attacked her, biting off part of her lip and leaving her with severe, permanent facial injuries. Doctors were unable to reattach the tissue, and she was left with lasting scarring and limited mobility in her mouth. He was later convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison, but for Hayes, that legal outcome was only one chapter of a much longer recovery. Rather than staying silent, she began speaking openly about the attack, not just to process what happened to her, but to help other people recognize dangerous relationship patterns before they escalate. She has used her platform to support others living through domestic violence, turning one of the worst moments of her life into a resource for people who might still be able to get out before it's too late. When Vanellope, sometimes referred to in reporting as Versivia, was born in 2010, doctors immediately recognized they were dealing with one of the rarest conditions in medicine. She was diagnosed with pentalogy of Cantrell, a congenital condition estimated to affect roughly 1 in a million births, which causes severe defects in the chest wall, diaphragm, and heart. In her case, her heart developed outside her chest cavity, protected by nothing more than a thin layer of skin. Doctors gave her family little hope that she would survive infancy, since most babies with this level of defect don't make it past the first days or weeks due to infection risk and organ complications. She defied that prognosis. As she grew, surgery to move her heart back into her chest was considered too dangerous, given the risk of damaging major vessels. So her family and medical team focused instead on constant monitoring and protecting her fragile condition day to day. Videos of her living an active, playful childhood, heart visibly beating beneath her skin, offered something the public almost never gets to see: the human heart, in motion, doing its job in plain sight. Most people have heard of progeria, the genetic condition that causes rapid aging in children, usually limiting life expectancy to the mid-teens. Tiffany Wedekin's case was different. She was diagnosed with a far rarer, non-classic form of progeria that progresses more slowly than the childhood version, which meant she lived into her 30s and beyond, years past what her family had once been told to expect. She still experienced many of the condition's hallmark effects: hair loss, fragile skin, joint stiffness, and added strain on her cardiovascular system, which remains the leading cause of death in progeria patients due to accelerated arterial aging. Her own brother, who shared the same diagnosis, passed away from related heart complications in his 30s. Rather than retreating from public life, Wedekin chose to speak openly about what it means to live in a body that ages on a different timeline than everyone around her, turning a diagnosis defined by loss into a public conversation about resilience and identity. 10 women. 10 bodies that refused to follow the rules doctors thought were fixed. Some were born this way. Some survived something no one should have to. All of them turned an impossible situation into something the rest of us can learn from, whether that's a new drug target, an earlier diagnosis, or just proof of how much a person can endure and still choose to speak. Which one shocked you the most? Let us know, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories you won't believe are real.